This is English 385-28. That old English magic. All right. So, we last left off in the prior lecture. You could watch these lectures in any order, so this could be preview or review. We last left off in the prior lecture talking about how Old English tends to express grammar more through its morphology, while present-day Englishes tend to express their grammar more through their syntax. We've already covered the fact that grammar, in general, is expressed in languages through morphology combined with syntax. But now I'd like to introduce two more terms here, really important terms: synthetic and analytic. Now, there are tons of other meanings to those two words, but this is a set of specific meanings to the history of the English language that are important. So don't get confused with these words by trying to attach them to other meanings of synthesis and analysis that you might have found. We just mean it in these usages. I wish that historical linguists used a different set of terms, but here we are. Synthetic and analytic. A synthetic language expresses its grammatical information through morphology in a single word form, usually bound, right? So a synthetic language tends to express its grammatical information through morphology primarily. Analytic. An analytic language or variety expresses its grammatical information in multi-word phrases, that is, through syntax. As we have already said, Old English tends to express its grammar primarily through the forms of its words, through the word's morphology, by inflecting those words. Thus, Old English is primarily a synthetic language. Not entirely. Word order matters to Old English grammar, but word shape matters more. We've also discussed how present-day Englishes tend to communicate their grammar mostly by the ordering of words in relation to other words added, like auxiliaries, to make the grammar make sense. In fact, Smith and Kim have pointed out one feature of Nigerian English is that it does not even carry inflection for the most part for tense, aspect, mood, or person, right? So like Nigerian English, or Englishes more broadly in the early modern and present-day English period, we are primarily analytic. That is, we express our grammatical information by adding or subtracting or reordering words in a phrase, rather than changing the shape of the words in any particular way. This is not to say we are entirely analytic in present-day Englishes, Nigerian English included, right? All present-day Englishes do change the shape of some words, particularly pronouns, to express their grammatical function. But when we talk about the progression from Old English to Middle English to early modern and present-day English, we can articulate that progression as a movement from a primarily synthetic variety, or primarily synthetic language and set of varieties, to a primarily analytic language and set of varieties. One important way that Old English expressed grammatical information through morphology is in how it conjugates its verbs. Now, I just used a term that I realized I didn't make a slide about, conjugate. Some of you who have learned, let's say, Western European languages might already know this term. To conjugate is to inflect a verb. If you're inflecting a noun, we usually call it declining. So if we're talking about the way to inflect a verb, we call it the conjugation. And if we call it the way to inflect a noun, and generally an adjective, we call that declension. So you might hear me use conjugate or decline. That's what I mean by that. And when Old English is looking at verbs, it separates its verbs, without necessarily calling them this, into strong and weak verbs. This has nothing to do with whether the verbs are powerful or flimsy. Again, these are two words that historical linguists use that have other meanings in other contexts, but here they just mean something morphological, right? What they mean here is whether the verb's tense is expressed with a dental suffix or through sound gradations in the root vowel, what we call ablaut. What? Sound gradation is in the root vowel? You know this already. This is about defamiliarization. Drink, drank, drunk. Everything about those three words sounds exactly the same except for the root vowel. We move from I to a, to at least in my English pronunciation. That's called ablaut. That's expressing tense changes in a verb by changing its root vowel. That's as opposed to, say, think of a word, drop. Drop, dropped. In that case, I have changed the tense of the word by adding a dental suffix. In this case, dropped. Right? I don't change the root vowel of drop. I don't say I drap it. I say I dropped it. You can see there's tons of examples of weak vowels. Weak vowels tend to be the norm. In present-day English, we have pen, penned, penned. Follow, follow, followed. Should be follow, followed, followed, by the way. Kick, kicked, kicked. Dance, dance, danced, etc. Related, grabbed, breathed. In each of these cases, if you're wondering why I've repeated the second word twice, it's because I'm trying to show the three principal parts of the verb. That is, the present tense, the simple past, and the participle, the past participle, right? With weak verbs, the simple past and the participle are identical. We would say, Dmitri kicked the ball, and the ball was kicked by Dmitri. But the other class of verbs in Old English we would call strong verbs. And again, these strong, weak terms don't actually mean strong, right, or weak, but you can think of them a little bit that way, in that the strong verbs are strong enough to change at their core, while the weak verbs only add a little dental suffix at the end. If that mnemonic is helpful to you, go ahead. But anyway, Dmitri threw the ball. Dmitri throws the ball. The ball was thrown by Dmitri. You see the threw to throw, the root vowel changes. If any tense shift is marked by any root vowel change, we call that a strong verb. Write, wrote, written. And some of these come with also changes that are added to the end of the word. Usually we add an n sound to a lot of the participles, but we are talking here if there is a change in tense expressed through ablaut, through sound gradations in the root vowel, then we would call this a strong verb in Old English, and if we wish, now. Write, wrote, written. Drive, drove, driven. Choose, chose. Sing, sang, sung. Drink, drank, drunk. Steal, stole, stolen. Notice sometimes we retain the same root vowel across a couple of tense gradations, but there's always a shift somewhere. Speak, spoke, spoken. Break, broke, broken. Shake, shook, shaken. Right? Sometimes it's the simple past and the past participle that have the identical verb. Take, took, taken. Fly, flew, flown. Blow, blew, blown. Here's the kicker. You might have learned to call... Ooh, it's so intense that I'm getting fuzzy for some reason. You might have learned to call these verbs irregular and regular verbs. And sure, okay, but actually the supposedly irregular verbs are regular. They're historical. In their Old English forms, and indeed most irregular verbs, or what we now call irregular verbs, descend from strong verbs in Old English. They were that way because they followed a set of rules about how to conjugate a verb that were actually pretty regular, right? In fact, you can see here in the chart I provided that there are 7 recognizable classes, class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4, class 5, class 6, class 7, of how ablaut is realized in verbs. So the ones that sound like write, wrote, written, drive, drove, driven, those are class 1 strong verbs in Old English, and so forth. Don't worry, I will not be asking you, though some textbooks do, I will not be asking you to keep in mind which class is which and memorize all 7 classes and the paradigms within them. I do, however, want you to notice that what seem like irregular verbs, the bane of second language learners of English, what seem like irregular verbs were not always bafflingly irregular. It's just that the rules that they followed have fallen out largely of English, and so the ones that hung on hang on sometimes in mutated ways. You'll notice here, for instance, that class 2 verbs, look, for instance, used to be look, leak, loken. This used to be a strong verb, but now we say look, looked, looked. Like many verbs in the process of moving from Old English to Middle English and eventually to Early Modern, a lot of strong verbs stop being strong and assimilate to weak forms. Choose actually had a simple past as cheas and chose in class 2 as well. So you can see that in the Old English form, cheosan and lokan, chose cheas chosa, lok leak loken, right? These actually fit the same paradigm. It's just that history has changed them. What's cool now is that now that I've covered, whoop, geez, that's not supposed to go over there yet. Sorry. Now that I've covered strong and weak verbs, and leaving out endonormative and exonormative, which is something I wish I had covered in class, but I've decided to skip over, we have now covered, remember this huge list of all of the terms that I'd like you to know by the end of term? We've covered all of them. If you want to talk to me about exonormative and endonormative sometime, I'll happily talk to you about it in office hours. But other than that one dead at the center, we have covered all of these terms. And so you should be able to understand what they mean, say, for the take-home test in week 7. But I said this was about Old English magic, and I meant it. Wrong Zoom again. I said this was about Old English magic, and I meant it. I have shared with you in the Google Drive file and on the course website the Old English magic sheet, which I have here magically made semi-transparent so I can point to it with ease, which is something I'm very proud of myself for figuring out how to do. Anyway, this is the Old English magic sheet. What do we do with this? This is a tool that was developed by teachers of Old English. The version you're looking at is the one that was developed by Peter S. Baker for his Old English Learning Textbook. The 3rd edition here, copyright 2016. This magic sheet lays out paradigms, that is, lays out patterns that Old English pronouns, nouns, adjectives, and verbs follow pretty regularly. It helps you realize that it's not that Old English has no sense or that its forms are all over the place. It's just that being a synthetic language, a synthetic variety of the language, since it has to express most of its grammar through changing the form of its nouns, pronouns, verbs, and adjectives, it needs more forms, and it needs more gradations of how those forms are expressed. But there are commonalities among them. And the nice thing about the magic sheet and what makes it so magical is that similar forms are highlighted in different colors. That draws your attention to them. So you'll see the nominative, singular, accusative, genitive, and dative of strong nouns, right? There are also strong nouns, weak nouns, strong verbs, strong adjectives, weak adjectives. I won't be covering those much in lecture, but Smith and Kim do. And you don't need to know, because I don't cover these in lecture, you don't need to know them well for the final. But you'll see here that strong nouns in the genitive singular look the same regardless of whether they're masculine or neuter. Here, stanus, shippus, thingus. You can recognize then, as a general rule, if something ends with the es, it's probably genitive singular, as we've already discussed this week. You can see here other genitive singulars follow that. If you're looking at a strong masculine or neuter adjective, you also have huatus, gaudus. If you're looking at interrogative pronouns, the forebear of the word whose, huas. If you're looking at athematic words, this is actually irregular words, you still see that the genitive singular of man is manus. And importantly, personal pronouns, you have his. Demonstrative pronouns like the, that, those. If you want to say of those, or rather of that, or of those, actually just of that because it's genitive singular. If you want to say of the or of that, you might just say thas. Of this, thises. You see? So looking at all those yellow points, you can identify that genitive singulars tend to have s endings in Old English. They don't always. For instance, if a noun is in a feminine gender, like gift or sorrow, it will not have the es. So it's not completely reliable. But if you see an es ending added to something, and it's a noun or an adjective or demonstrative pronoun, you can guess that it's very likely a genitive singular. And thus you can break down a sentence in that way, just by knowing a few key words and the magic sheet. You will, of course, even if you were doing the final take-home test in person in the exam period, I would give you a copy of the magic sheet to hold next to you, and you can print it out, you can do whatever you wish with it, but this is yours. This belongs to every Old English learner, advanced and beginner, to refer to as they need to, because again, this is complicated, but the color coding really helps. Notice, for instance, let's take some more examples. Notice, for instance, and this actually, I'm surprised that I was about to refer to something. I'm surprised that it's not there. Oh, well. Notice the pink, right? Tham, thism. You notice there's something in common. Him, right? Wham, the equivalent of whom. In each of these cases, we have... In each of these cases, we have the dative singular of something, right? So we can identify that as similar to him, the dative singular, right? There are a couple that really stand out, and they get their own colors. For instance, well, actually, this should be in a color. I'm surprised it's not. But you'll notice that endings, stanum, shipum, thingum, yefum, sorium, namum, eagum, tungum, sunum, etc., right, all have the same ending across dative plural. So if you see one of these, you can reliably translate it as to or for the stones, to or for the ships, the things, the gifts, etc. We'll talk about what each of these words means in a future lecture. Right now, I just want to make sure you can see the forms here. All right? So what else do we have here? And you can explore this yourself. We'll see that the n ending, right? So thona, thisna, huatna, right? So here we have an adjective form, a demonstrative form, a third-person pronoun form. The n endings tend reliably to be accusative singular in every case, right? That's the ne endings. The ra endings, huatra, godra, etc., these tend to be genitive plural. And so on we go. Over here on this side we have, over here on this side we have verbs. And you'll see here that Baker has broken down all 7 classes and subclasses of strong verbs and given you a breakdown of the various principal parts of each of those. So if you need to know the principal parts of ritan, you have the third person singular, rit, present tense. The first past, right, so he wrote or she wrote or it wrote. Then, I'm sorry, cut that, start again. He writes, she writes, it writes, writ. He wrote, she wrote, it wrote, rat. And then skipping the second past would be they, or you. But let's go to the past participle. Written, right? It is written. You see? And you can see here again, highlighted by different colors, that all of these have the same form. All of these have the same form, and most of these have the same form. This is really important. The third person present singular tends to end with either a th, as in licht, hilpt, stilth, spricht, she speaks, or a dental, rit, right? Chest, hat, etc. Get it? And all of these strong verbs, being strong verbs, have similar root vowel changes as well, similar ablaut, right? You can see them all changing the same way on the inside too. There's always a form of e in most of them at least. We give you some for strong versus weak verbs here too. And again, you can always just find and break down what each of the words means. I'm not going to leave you hanging. And of course, here you have a breakdown of all the personal pronouns that we've already gone over in our pronoun lecture. Right? I'm not going to leave you hanging to translate this too much or to use the magic sheet without help. We're going to go over it again and certainly cover it in class if you have any questions. I do want to draw attention though to seeing how these forms, right, noticing that they end in th or t, are reflected here, right? Present third person singular, hilpth for help on, to help. If we break that down here, right, we see the imperative, as in present day English, is the sort of barest form. The imperative of to help is help, right? The imperative of fremman, to perform or to do, is fremma, do it, right? The past participle, holpen, right? Again, that should be familiar to us a bit now. Notably, The present participle, helpende, should remind us of what later would become some of the northern forms, right? And over here we see, importantly, the present first singular, present second singular, present third singular. I help, thou hilpst, he, she, or it hilpth. Or better to say, each helpe, here we go, thu hilpst, he, hit, heo, hilpth. Bam. You're conjugating Old English. Let's try some sentences before I let you go. And I'm sorry if this lecture seems a bit harried. As you can see, I'm giving it in my bathroom while my kid is yelling upstairs, but I hope this is shedding light rather than darkening. I'm going to give you one sentence here. Seo, this is from Millward and Hayes' textbook, I love it. Seo evile quena, biteth hlud hunt, mid scherpen tothum. You actually can figure out what this sentence means. First, let's figure out what each word means. Seo, you can find that right here on the magic sheet. Seo, let's look for it, What? Hold on, oh, I'm looking in the wrong place. Yeah, there it is, sorry, I lost it. Woof! Seo, that is a nominative, singular, feminine demonstrative. It means the, that, or those. In this case, it's not those because it's singular, so we have the or that. Evila. We'll go over why a medial F has the V sound, but you can generally assume that between two vowels, the F has a V sound. So the or that, evila, evil. Quena, that evil queen. Beateth. Well, we know that the third person singular here, right here, third person singular ends in th. And we can guess if it has a th ending, it doesn't seem to be a noun at all. None of the noun forms end in a th sound. So we can deduce that beateth is definitely a verb. What's a verb that sounds like beateth to you? It could either be beat or bite. And I'll let you know right now it's bite, but you can actually deduce it here. Hlude. You'll learn in your Smith and Kim reading that words like this with a h in front of them in a h consonant cluster, you can just chop the h off and you get lude, loud. Hund, hound. Mid, with. Remember SCs in Old English have a sh? Scherpen. Torthm. That's why we get why it's biteth. Scherpen, torthm. Okay. The evil queen bites, loud, hound, with sharp teeth. But here's the question. Who's doing the biting? As we know, Old English expresses its grammar through not word order, but through word shape. So we would expect it's the dog doing the biting. But here we have the evil queen bites the loud hound with sharp teeth. And this is interesting, right? We know it's the evil queen doing the biting, not because she comes first, but because of the case of the words. Seo evile quena. Seo is always nominative, singular. Seo is the one doing the biting. There is some syntax in Old English, so whatever word is immediately next to the demonstrative pronoun is almost certain, in fact, certainly the noun phrase that it's introducing. So we have seo evile quena, and we know that seo must be the one doing the thing, and so she is doing the biting of the hlud hund, right? We have that already, and that's enough to deduce that is seo evile quena bites the loud hound with scherpen torthem. With, like to or for, is something that always takes the dative. The scherpen torthem is, you guessed it, the indirect object of bites. And as we have already covered, is almost, is actually pretty consistently, is an ending for dative plurals. In fact, now we know that it's a plural. It's not sharp tooth, but sharp teeth. The evil queen bites the loud hound with sharp teeth.